conspiracy theories, untested vaccines, long-term safety, booster shots. These were your questions about COVID vaccinations, and today I'm here to answer them. Hi guys, I'm Lane, your doctor on demand for down-to-earth health education designed to boost your confidence and help you feel good about yourself. Now firstly, thank you for all your comments on my last video on AstraZeneca, which if you haven't seen yet, you might want to watch before this one. I thought I'd share with you my first message, which was a little aggressive. Why don't you just be honest and admit this COVID pandemic is bullshit? Nothing but a government setup and all you doctors are involved. Where is your integrity? You should be locked up. Thanks, Mum. Another comment reads, your photo makes it look like you've already suffered the side effects of the vaccine. Oh, ouch. No, that's just my face. Thanks. Okay, so one of the comments was, I'd be willing to get vaccinated if it was created the old way, not this new untested way. Is there plans for a traditional vaccine for COVID-19? To see if you can answer this question, what year do you think the first vaccine was ever developed? I'll make it easy, I'll give you three options, 1910, 1856, or 1796. Would you believe it was 1796? And it was the smallpox vaccine. So this was developed by a clever guy called Edward Jenner. And essentially all he did was observe that people who got a different virus called cowpox, very similar to smallpox but much milder, were not getting smallpox. So he created a vaccine using cowpox to build immunity to the smallpox virus, which was much more deadly and dangerous. Now, obviously, since then, scientists have been working on lots of newer, better ways to develop vaccines. But regardless of how the vaccine works, the outcome is always the same. Vaccination is only effective if it can teach your body how to recognize specific organisms. In other words, vaccinations teach your immune system what particular viruses or bacteria look like so that if they ever enter your body, they can be recognized and destroyed before they do any harm. The thing is, for your immune system to learn to recognize a virus or bacteria, it actually doesn't need to see the entire organism. It just needs to recognize something unique to that virus, such as a surface protein. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine working for a security company at a major airport. Part of your training as a security guard will be how to respond to an attack. But every airport in the world will certainly be trying to avoid an attack before it happens. How do they do this? Surveillance cameras, body scans, roaming officers. These would be the general defenses. And then there's the more specific and targeted defenses. Let's say, for example, there's a person of interest. Now, obviously, the way to avoid that person getting into the airport is to recognize them as they approach the airport. But how do you do this? Well, you can circulate a photo of the person. In recent years, facial recognition software has made it much easier to identify somebody, but imagine if you could take it to the next level. Imagine if, for example, you had a way of knowing exactly what this person looks like without needing a photo, without actually ever having needed to see them. This is essentially what is happening with current vaccinations. Traditional vaccines use the organism or part of the organism to create the vaccination, whereas some of the modern technology utilizes genetic code found in the DNA to recreate the exact same proteins found on the surface of the organism, which are what our immune system builds antibodies against. The technology itself has actually been in development for about 30 years. When you think about it, creating traditional vaccines requires you to be able to grow the organisms, and that needs to be done in specialized laboratories and in bulk. This can take time. What's particularly exciting about this newer technology is that it means that vaccinations will be able to be developed a lot quicker. Not because they're cutting corners when it comes to trials or safety testing, but because the actual manufacturing of the vaccine is so much more efficient. Okay, next comment or question was, these vaccines are currently in clinical trial phase. They are only provisionally approved in Australia. Delayed adverse events are unknown at this stage as long-term data is not available. Cigarettes, lead products and asbestos were all thought to be safe until many years later, realizing how deadly they really were. So firstly, yes, you are quite correct. These vaccinations are currently provisionally registered in Australia. But if I can just provide a little bit of context there, the vaccines themselves have undergone trials overseas as part of their development. And then all of these trials have to be reanalyzed by experts independently in Australia before they can be recommended for use over here. Now, admittedly, there's been some confusion because of the time frame. We've always been told that vaccines take years to develop, and these ones have happened really quickly. But this diagram here is from the National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance, and it's on their website. You can have a look, and I think it demonstrates really nicely how the conventional timeframe and the COVID timeframes are different, not because steps have been cut, but because in the COVID timeframes, everything has happened much quicker. When you think about it, the world's been in lockdown, so it's been unprecedented in how quickly they've been able to get trials up and running. Now, the question you ask about long-term safety is very valid. And obviously, there's really no way to speed this step up. We literally just need time to observe the vaccines and how they work. So I guess that's where some of the disparities come. Some people feel that we should have waited, others feel that we needed to get these out quicker. That's where the provisional registration has happened. Provisional registration exists for very reasons like a global pandemic, because in a situation like we're in now, it's just not feasible to wait for years. Quite honestly, I think that the safety profile of these vaccines have been really undervalued worldwide because of the fact that they have been created quickly. Okay, will we need booster shots? Good question, but I don't know. I think it's still a little bit too early to say. At this stage though, I think the main priority is just to get people vaccinated with their first dose, and then moving forward, booster regimes will be worked out depending on what's needed. So one comment I received was about relative risk and absolute risk, and it referred to a Lancet study which shows vaccines are less than 1.5% effective compared with placebo. Okay, so firstly, this is not a study, it's a review article. It's quite a different thing. So essentially what's happened is 3 independent authors have reviewed data and evidence from other studies, and they have written their own opinion piece about the way in which that data has been presented. Secondly, I think you've misinterpreted the statistics. You say that the vaccines are less than 1.5% effective compared to the placebo. That's not really what the authors are saying, and it's certainly not true. The concepts of absolute versus relative risk reductions are both important, but the thing about absolute risk reduction, it's a moving target. So it's going to be different if you're based in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, or the Outback. And to be fair, this is actually something I spoke about in my video, where I explained how relative risk needs to be considered in the context of where you are living. Which is why, to be honest, the article's not really that compelling from a scientific or public health perspective. It's not telling us anything we don't already know. What I can say though is that this article has certainly sparked some debate within the medical community, which is a good thing. There was actually a response article written in the same journal a month later, and a follow-up from the authors in response to the response article. Now, you might want to check out my next video where I talk a little bit more about the history of smallpox and why the lessons we learned from smallpox are so relevant during COVID. In fact, the story behind smallpox is absolutely mind-blowing, so do check it out. Click the link on your screen right now, and don't forget to subscribe to stay in touch with my new videos.